Welcome to Unistan. This is a very brief video. We've talked about how to basic 3D model in Tinkercad. We've talked about how to make a fan blade and fan hub and attach it all together in the last one. Now I'm going to be talking about some brief considerations before we submit our files for 3D printing. A couple of things that we need to make sure before our file is submitted. Of course, we want to make sure that our fan blade has the best chance of surviving, but also the best chance to get the highest energy rating. So, a couple of things. The first thing we want to do is just inspect the model to make sure there's no massive overhangs. Now, what do I mean by that? When we're 3D printing, it's really tricky to imagine this, but this itself is actually quite easy to print. You can see because it's going to be printed in layer by layer. The bottom layer gets printed, then the second layer, the third layer, the fourth layer, and it kind of just ends up being printed and it looks like a donut at the end. However, if I was to rotate this like this, there we go, this is really difficult to print. And the reason being is you'll notice that there are floating bits on top here. And in 3D printing, we can't print floating bits. Now, what does that mean for our fan? Well, it means that you need to make sure that your fan blade is something like this and not the wrong way around like this. This is really difficult to print. Imagine if you were trying to build this from the ground up and you needed foundations or poles in order to keep this sturdy. It would be very difficult for us to build this up here and then build this next part and then also build the other part. So we need to make sure that our fan blade is sitting nice and flat on the bed there. So we check for overhangs because that is okay. It's being printed about 45 degrees. We want to make sure that it's not looking something like this. Oh, that's the wrong button. If I rotate it around and it looks like this is very difficult to print. Again, there's a massive gap on the bottom. We don't want that. Okay, so the overhangs, we want to make sure that they're not too bad there. Overhang meaning there's too many bits with a massive gap on the bottom. Scaling is very important as well. A lot of our students ended up making fans that were unfortunately too small or too big. Please make sure, remember that what we do is this number is in millimeters. So if it's 20, that is actually only 2 centimeters big. So please make sure that you just draw it out on paper or grab a ruler. Double check that the sizing of these values are correct. For example, if I group all of it together and then I select the object, this is telling me, if I click this button there, this is telling me that the whole thing is 100 millimeters or 10 centimeters big. That's not very big. That is not very big. So maybe you may want to reconsider make that bigger. The mistake that a lot of students do when they make this bigger is that they will grab the whole thing and they'll drag this bigger. The problem with that is that you'll remember from the last lesson that we had to have a very specific size for this whole shape there. And it had to be 2.35 by 1.8. You don't have to memorize those numbers, but you have to know that those numbers are very specific. And so this now is not those numbers. It is 3.57 and 2.74. It needs to be those exact measurements. So if you do end up making your fan bigger, make sure you go back and fix those numbers up. So we end up with 2.35 and 1.8 for the other one. That needs to be the same for our value there. And just double check by re-centering that in the middle. Okay, that's pretty much it. We need to make sure that we are aware of the 3D printing process. Of course, us teachers and our staff are happy to 3D print it for you, but as long as you're aware, you've got it in the right orientation. So for example, you're printing it flat down and not like this. You also have it so that we don't have any massive floating bits up in the air for some reason that just detach from your fan. It needs to be all one big piece that isn't floating. Once you've done that, then you are ready to submit. So a quick reminder of that is DHS homepage. It's the 3D print request button, and then we put in our information in the new or create a ticket section there.